Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. Well, today the podcast gets a dramatic upgrade. Eva's back, everyone. Round of applause. We can hear it all across the nation, all across the world. Eva is back with us. I'm excited to have a conversation with you today because, quite frankly, I like you better than your husband.
That's so funny.
Funny because it's true. No, we're glad to sit down and have this conversation together. We actually were talking off mic that we've stumbled into something that we're both using to help people. So this might be a multi-episode conversation that we get into. We'll see what happens.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Well, it was your plan. That's why it's good. So we're going to be talking today about the window of tolerance, which I'm surprised that more people don't know about. And I think you're probably in that same camp. It's an incredibly effective tool. We're going to break that down to figure out why it's so effective, how you're using it, what people are saying about it, so that our listeners can kind of spin up on this idea. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Me too.
So where do you want to start?
Well, why don't we start with just explaining the window of tolerance?
Okay, you first.
Okay. So when I know that I am in my window of tolerance, I feel really strong emotionally. I feel competent. I can be curious. I'm relaxed, very content. I feel balanced. I'm able to make rational decisions. I'm hopeful. And I'm able to take some risk without being overwhelmed, without feeling anxious.
So already I can tell those are all things that sound very positive, right?
Yeah.
So already I'm putting together being in the window is a positive thing.
Yes, it is.
It's not all positive, but you're in a positive frame of mind. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So the goal is for someone to stay there, exist there, live from there. That's kind of their point of view. I understand the idea of a window, and I think all our listeners will as well, but it's kind of like, okay, well, what do I do to get there? Because if you're describing those things, I want all of those things.
Right.
Sometimes I just don't feel very good at making them happen in my own life.
Exactly. And, a lot of times it's really doing the work in therapy, understanding like what gets triggered inside of me that will take me out of my window of tolerance. So I've got to know myself. I've got to know where I've been, where I've come from, what set me up. And also, my own self-care or anyone's own self-care. Am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating nutritiously? Am I exercising on a regular basis in order to stay in my window of tolerance? I mean, there's a lot of ingredients that go into it.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you talk about the physical side of it, and I think our listeners would be as well, because it feels like this is an emotional idea, but there's a very physical component.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
When you guys say often, if it's hysterical, it's historical, there's a lot, this kind of explains that as well. Like you and Roan use the term set up, which I love. It's like, this is an ambush, right?
Right.
Something has set this up, this reaction that I'm having, and it could have more to do with me than it does with the other person.
Right.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing to think about, because it feels like we're having to take ownership for something that somebody else did. But that's not right. It's a little different.
Right. It is a little different in that you have to look back at your history, right? And how have I reacted in my past to difficult situations?
That's a hard question.
It is. It is.
That feels like a level of honesty most of us aren't ready for.
Not in the beginning.
Right. So
in the beginning.
It takes help, right?
Right. It sure does.
So you're walking your client base through this. How does one of those sessions go? You just pull a sheet of paper out and say, hey, here's the window? Or how do you begin talking about this with someone who maybe doesn't know about the idea yet?
Well, many times, because I work a lot with partners who've been betrayed.
Okay.
Or I have a client that may be dealing with a lot of anxiety, some depression. And so we have to get the client to a stable place before they're willing to look at themselves, right? And what is the cause, right? What has happened to me? And so I personally like to be pretty directive many times, because when somebody comes to me in crisis, like they want a plan. They want to, like, what is my next step? How can I get better? Right? They really and truly want to get better. They want to be able to make some rational decisions for their life, right? But they've got to know themselves first.
And that's difficult work because you have to dig.
Right, you
you
do.
have to look backwards in order to move forwards, which feels very counterintuitive.
Exactly.
But this model says, okay, there are most likely some things that have happened in your story. Either you happened to them or they happened to you.
Yep.
And the language I've heard used around the window is that it squeezes it. It makes it more narrow, in that the sound wave that normally is happening inside of this window of tolerance, where everything is okay, it may mean that I'm having highs and lows, but I can regulate. That gets squeezed down, for instance, if there is some form of abuse, physical abuse, or the loss of a parent at an early age, or there are all sorts of things that could be either large or small that squeeze that window.
Right.
And as we progress into being adults and having to live lives in the middle of chaos, then we find ourselves with the inability to, the word I would use is regulate. Is that the word you would use?
I would, definitely. And, looking back at my own story and just when betrayal happened in our marriage, like my window was very small. And I didn't know that.
Isn't that crazy?
I had no idea.
That's a terrible word to use on a podcast about mental health, but isn't that odd that we can be operating with a very small window, or some would say capacity to handle variation, and it just feels normal to us.
I know. I know.
For me, I was the exact same way. I was diagnosed with cancer at 17, and it was life-threatening, right? But it really squeezed my window. But after I got finished with treatment, it was time to go to college. So I went to college with a very tight window of tolerance.
Right.
That's not a great place to be when your window of tolerance is very small. I just had no idea that was actually happening. It just felt like, okay, and I think our listeners could agree with this. That happened. It's over. I'm moving on. But those things have their effects.
Right.
I appreciate you saying that you want to be gentle with the client. It's probably been a heavy lift for them to show up in a room to discuss anything.
Yes.
I'm really curious about how that goes, or what that looks like for you. And I'm sure the people listening as well, like how do you help somebody feel safe, regulated enough to go to the place talking about the things that squeeze the window?
Everybody's different. Every client is different. Some people come in and they're like, I just want to talk. I just want to process. I want to tell you what's happened. I want somebody to hear me. I want to feel validated. And, yes, that is a great starting point. Just to have a place where it's confidential. It's not going anywhere. They can say whatever they need to say or want to say. So many times it is just processing, like what has happened to them. Then I like to use, we call it owning our story. They're just questions that people will answer, and then we'll take someone through those answers of the questions to look at what are the facts, what is the impact that it's had on me, what track did it set me on. After that, we like to do what's called a trauma. We call it a trauma wall. Comes from originally it was a trauma egg, still is, but we call it a wall just because it's more indicative of what has happened and how we have formed walls to protect ourselves. And so in those two areas, both of those exercises that clients will do, helps them really understand what has happened to them. What are the toxic shame messages that have come out of that have absolutely contributed to a small window of tolerance?
Yes, nothing squeezes a window like shame, isn't it?
That's
it
the
is
truth.
a powerful thing. And the owning your story, I can just give a little personal experience there. Sitting with Roan, I went through this as I was beginning my journey. The question on that exercise that made the most impact on me was, how did your dad feel when he found out your mom was pregnant with you? And I mean, I was ginning through this whole thing. Like, I'm going to answer this like the best person that's ever answered this. And I just wanted to win over owning my story, which is probably, part of my journey I should think about more. But I got to this question and thought, I don't know. I don't know how he felt. And man, did that open up a lot of stuff, which is not, the stuff for podcasts, but it can be that nuanced, right? And I love the fact that you're pointing out it is where the client wants to start. What is it that you want? That's a very empowering question to ask.
Yes. What is your goal?
What's your goal, right?
Right.
We know they want a plan, but how do you want to get there?
Yeah.
I feel as I'm talking to people, that's something that gets run over a lot in the mental health space, is what the client actually wants. But we have to start there if we're talking about expanding the window of tolerance. So let's talk about when you get out of it, maybe on the top side, when you get out of it on the bottom side, a little bit about what that looks like, so that maybe our listeners could identify, oh yeah, that's me when I'm out of the window up top, or when I'm out of the window down low.
Okay. So I'm assuming that you mean on the top of the window is when you're hyper aroused.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of go sideways. I think of it as sideways.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting, isn't it?
You're left and right.
I go left and right.
Okay, yeah.
I go
good.
vertical. You go horizontal.
Yep.
Which, hey, there may be a metaphor in that.
Probably.
Maybe you go to God first.
You just exposed a lot of my brokenness, but that's okay.
No, I love that. I love that you go high. So hyperarousal, let me just describe what hyperarousal is.
Sure.
That's when we're in our fight, flight, or fawn responses. And fawn means just people pleasing.
Okay. I don't know much about that, but I've heard something about it. People pleasing. It's one of my favorite methods of coping, pleasing other people. I would not attach that to hyperarousal. That's interesting,
Isn't it?
Okay.
Isn't it?
It is a form of activity, and usually not a great return on investment. So that makes sense.
No, and it takes energy.
Tons of energy.
Tons.
Especially in the American South.
Exactly.
There's a very long line of people to please, and it usually starts with mom and dad.
Yes,
right.
It does. Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so includes that, yeah.
Hyperarousal is when you feel overwhelmed with adrenaline. Your heart may be racing. You may be physically shaking, trembling. The urge to move your body is great. Either way, away from or toward the stressful event. You could be angry. Anger has lots of energy attached to it. You may feel out of control, emotionally out of control. Mm-hmm. You may feel a lot of fear, anxiety, and the need to accommodate or to please people.
As you described that sounds like Tuesday. That's me.
I'm so curious. What happened on Tuesday?
Man, no, that's every Tuesday. I think probably the majority of our listeners are nodding at like, yep, been there. Uh-huh. And I think this is a truth we should probably expose at this point in the episode. Everyone experiences this in their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is universal.
Yes.
Some of the paradigms we talk about don't apply to everyone. This one definitely does. So everyone's going to have a place of common interest here.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I would assume we're now on your left. We're on the left for hypo.
For hypo.
Does it look the exact opposite, or is it a little more?
It is more of a freeze response.
Okay.
When you're hypo aroused, that's when you may feel sluggish, depressed, suddenly exhausted, foggy, zoned out, paralyzed, maybe even frozen. It's a numb, shut down response, disconnected from the world, or maybe even seeing yourself as though you're watching yourself from the outside.
Got it.
Looking in.
So when I talk about this with clients, I attach it even to chemicals. That, the hyper, we've got kind of the Adderall. I got to get it done. I got to focus. And the hypo is more like the Ambien. Like just, I want to take a pill, make it go away, sleep for a long time. Maybe when I check back in with reality, this will all be better. Right. But we're saying that both of those responses, although natural, it feels as you're describing them, although they're natural, they're not healthy.
Right. They're not. However, we all do them.
Okay.
We all do them. Right. But I think it's just important to know yourself. Like if I find myself hyper aroused, what is it going to take to get me back to my window of tolerance?
That is a great question. So if you don't mind, could you just answer that for you so that maybe our listeners could say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. That would help me as well.
Right. So if I find myself hyper aroused, I really need to take a time out.
Okay.
And maybe go for a walk, listen to some good music, call a friend, talk it out with a safe person, whatever that looks like. I may need to just sleep if I'm really tired.
Okay.
And it may look different in the morning. There was a time in my life where I was not able to go to sleep when I was in hyperarousal state.
Wow. That
I
was
could
that
not,
powerful.
had so much energy. There was so much energy attached to it. So that's been growth for me to be able to go to sleep, even if I'm in a hyperarousal state. To be able just to kind of calm down. And to calm down, many times I need reassurance.
Okay.
I may ask Roan for reassurance. Like, we're sideways. These things are not going great. I just need some reassurance that we're going to talk this through tomorrow.
I love the way you're describing getting back into your window has two separate modalities. Either you can use people to help you, or you can use things that you know that you enjoy that are calming to help you. It can be either one, because in my experience, we like to think that people are always available, but they're actually not. Right?
No.
Sometimes when I'm hyper aroused, when I'm out of the window, because it's my job to be in front of people a lot, it feels very draining to have to connect to someone else in order to help me pull back down. It's a little bit easier to pull up the app or the playlist or do some journaling, something that's very closed in that doesn't require me to be switched on and with someone else, right?
Okay.
Even if they are safe, I think, oh man, I've got to make the phone call, or we've got to connect for a cup of coffee, and I'm just in something a little more acute where I've got to pull down quicker than that, right?
Okay.
So sometimes for me, getting back into the window means creating space instead of moving towards, right?
Wow. And I'm the opposite.
Really?
Yes. People help me when I can talk it out, and they can validate me, and they can help me see it in a different way. Helps me get back into my window of tolerance.
Oh, that is very interesting. I think it's indicative of personality as
I do
well.
too. I do too.
Because I am, and this will be language that may confuse our listeners a bit, so I'll explain it, but I am a chameleon by nature.
Okay.
So once I engage with someone, I can kind of become what they need me to become, which is, some good, mostly bad. But to have to engage with someone and settle down when I'm that keyed up, and make sure that I'm explaining myself clearly, that I'm being genuine. A lot of times I just don't want to have to fight that, right?
Oh, yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Yeah, connecting with other people means that I have to do even more heavy lifting.
Gotcha.
Especially if I'm in a problem set, right? Where I'm embarrassed about that problem,
right?
And I have to reveal the fact that I messed this up, you know? So I have to watch out for which one I choose, because if I'm not careful, then I just isolate and I call it healthy. Right? Which I think that makes me a man, right?
Yeah, yes, I do too. Yes.
So the connecting to get down into the window. So if this is a two-forward a question, what about when you fall on the other side of the window where it's, I'd kind of like to sleep and just make it go away?
Well, I think, for me, I really used to call that growth.
Okay, I like it. We'll go with that.
I did not realize it was meaning that I was outside of my window of tolerance.
Okay.
When I would kind of disconnect.
It felt healthy.
It felt healthy for me, right?
That's the sneaky stuff
It
right there.
is. It
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah. Roan would call it dismissive, and I would call it healthy.
So we've just described marriage, everyone. Yeah. Two sides of the same coin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this piques my curiosity. Does that mean that you abandon all of those things, or they just needed to mature? How does that work?
What? Say that again.
Yeah, valid. The dismissive, the moving away from, the slowing down, the sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Do you
I hear
just
you.
throw all that out, or
No.
Okay.
No. As long as I'm communicating, hey, I need a timeout. I need space.
Okay.
I need to go and journal, figure out what I'm doing. I'm going to take a timeout, or I'm going to go for a drive. But if I communicate that, yeah, that's healthy, right?
Healthy stuff. Okay.
That's healthy stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm hypo aroused, right? I'm trying to get back to my window of tolerance. I'm not being withdrawn.
Yes, it's a regulating strategy.
Yes.
That's actually healthy, as long as it's being communicated. Right. Yeah. So in my life, I've learned to say to the people closest to me, I need a minute. Like, and it's interesting. We have all this code language inside of our family. I need a minute is one of those things. Like, okay, Ben's body has to catch up with his emotions, because his emotions have just run 1,000 miles an hour ahead of him.
Right.
So he's going to go outside.
Yeah.
The unhealthy version of me would be slamming the door, going to the garage, pouting, waiting for somebody to come out and rescue me. So when I say I need a minute, there's a little bit of accountability in there.
Right.
I'm going to step outside for a minute, right?
Yes.
Regulate myself a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and engage this situation. Right. And most people listening probably have guessed I have teenagers, and I have to do that very often, right? Because they are not regulating.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about what life is like when you can regulate inside of this window, what that feels like.
It feels like you're so centered, like you have control of yourself. It's self-control, which is really one of the fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
And I did not know that for a long, long time, that self-control was one of the fruits of the Spirit. Now, it doesn't mean that it magically comes. I have to work at it. I've had to work at it for sure to be able to have self-control. Where I'm not controlling other people, I'm really working on controlling my own emotions, getting to a place where I feel my best self. And in that, I'm not feeling any shame, right? In my own behavior. I feel good about me. I love the word curious, that I'm able to be curious and tell me more about that. And I mean, when I'm, it's a hard conversation.
Right.
But I'm practicing some self-control, not to go hyper or hypo.
Yeah. Boy, I can really resonate with that. And then it feels, the opposite way feels very white-knuckled. And for me personally, making sure that everything around me is settled so that then I can settle.
Yeah.
That's an exhausting way to live.
It is.
I did it for decades. So it's exhausting, but oddly sustainable, right? And then it pulls you into relationally trying to make sure that everyone around you understands the contract, the way they're supposed to act, what they're supposed to do, depending on the situation. You're trying to train your spouse, you're trying to train your kids. The easier work, although it feels harder, the easier work is to think about internally, how do I regulate me? Right. How do I take ownership for this? What does it look like for me, as you were describing, what does it look like for me to be settled, free?
Yeah.
When we start talking about these questions, it's unsettling because most of us don't really know. When did you start to discover this principle and it becomes so helpful for you?
I think it really and truly, I've been aware of it for a long time. I just used other words, to describe it.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work with the triangles, So they're kind of the same and just using different words. I mean, if I'm in my well-boundary state, I'm in my window of tolerance. If I'm in the perpetrator role, then I'm hyper-aroused. If I'm hypo-aroused, I may be in a victim state, kind of shut down. Or it could be a part of a perpetrator too, where I've withdrawn from the relationship and put the other person in solitary confinement.
This is why you're behind the mic instead of Rowan. That's brilliant, right? That you're layering these things one on top of the other. And we do talk about this often on this podcast, that every paradigm is just an attempt to describe a lot of the same things, right? That's why we have the Enneagram, we have the DISC, we have the Myers-Briggs, like we have the colors. They're all trying to get around this same idea.
Exactly.
Right? And
internal family systems, IFS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when we go back and start talking about the Cartman drama triangle, we did a whole episode on that and how it interacts with our sexual relationship with our partners. I mean, and now we have another way to talk about that. I'm outside of my window.
Right.
You know?
Right. And when I'm outside of my window, there's intensity on both. Whether you're up or down or left or right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's all intensity.
And we're asking another person to deal with that intensity.
Exactly.
Even though, and I haven't heard you go this far, maybe you can correct me, but it's really not their job.
No, it's not their job.
It's not their job.
To rescue me.
Yeah.
I wanted somebody to rescue me for a long time, though.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like that's how it should go.
However, when the betrayal has happened, right, the spouse who has been the betrayer, I mean, he's also, I'm going to say he, because that was the example in our case.
Sure, yeah.
He is also emotionally dysregulated. He's been using for a long time in order to regulate emotions, right? And so now he's trying to take that, he is taking that away from himself, right? So now he's emotionally dysregulated. The partner has just gotten all this new information and she's emotionally dysregulated. Now, maybe it's someone who had a big window of tolerance, but then betrayal happens and now that window is getting smaller because of betrayal.
Yes. Oh, man, you are hitting it right on the head right now, I think, with a lot of our listeners, and that it's difficult to explain to someone who's been betrayed. That the person who is committing to sobriety, right?
Yes.
They are now out there.
They're outside their window of tolerance.
And they have nothing that they have reps with to regulate, you know. So then
Not in the beginning.
Right, yeah, until they learn. And so now the home is not only a home where betrayal has gone on, or a relationship where betrayal, now we're fighting even more than we ever have.
Right.
And he seems like a different person than he was before, you know.
Right.
And then he starts talking about, well, yes, because I'm trying to not all these things.
Right, yes.
And that person most often does not know how to engage in community. So, like, there's just speaking of window, there's a window post-betrayal where the one who has betrayed has a lot to learn and actually needs a lot of grace, which is really hard to extend when you've been hurt.
Yes, and I don't know that the partner is able to do that in the beginning, for sure.
Right.
I don't think it's just not possible, but he can experience that in a community of other men who have a like experience.
I love that.
And so men will heal in community with other men who have a like experience, and so will women. Women will heal in a like community.
You know what the man says, though? But I want it from her.
And you know what the woman says? The female says, I want it from him.
We'll see you next week, right?
And I did too. Me too.
Yeah.
I wanted that too. And it didn't work out like that. Now, over time, Ron and most men are able to comfort the pain that they've caused.
Yeah. It just takes time.
It does.
What do we say?
Time, talking, and tears.
Yeah.
The 3 T's.
That's right. So we do have to give it some time to understand a lot of these principles. And I would propose, as we're talking today, roughly 30 minutes into this conversation, this window of tolerance is very powerful because it gives you another way to communicate to the other.
Right.
Well, I'm outside of my window.
Right.
And even if we don't know everything about what that means, it allows us to both kind of, okay, we can put our guns on the table. We can back up a little bit.
Right.
There's something that you need to do right now that isn't dependent upon me
Right.
to get to a place where we can discuss this. Right?
Yes. Also, in our window of tolerance, we're able to ask for what we need. And when the other person who's listening to what that person needs, if they're in their window of tolerance, they will say, hey, yeah, I've got that to give. Or they may say, no, I don't have that to give. Right? And if I can stay in my window of tolerance, I can accept either one.
From the other.
The other. Mm-hmm.
Or say either one. Yeah.
Right.
That's amazing. But we are exposing that if we're just asking, well, let me put this in the form of a question. Is it okay to just ask your significant other, the one you're romantically involved with, to be the primary spot for the window of tolerance to happen? Like pulling you down into that window, keeping you in that window, like you're the one. What I'm doing here is exposing a little bit of Christian thinking that's been going on for a very long time. You're my other, you're the other half. The two have become one, right? And what that means is you are my only spot for emotional regulation. It's a leading question. I'm assuming you would say that's probably an unwise idea.
It's very unwise.
So people who are trapped in that, though, it feels like it's what they're supposed to do.
I know.
So how do you break that, right?
Right. And many times people have not experienced, real intimacy inside the relationship or outside the relationship with other people, right? Really true intimacy where I'm fully known and fully accepted and I'm not hiding a thing and people love me, right? And when you're able to get that in a community, you don't really need it from the partner, from the spouse. Yes, if it is, it's just extra, right? I know at this point in my life, Ron's really just the cherry on top, right? I don't have to have him to have a really great cake.
Amazing.
Right? And my friends in my community of other women in recovery are my icing, and he's just the cherry on top.
That's great.
And I enjoy the cherry on top, but I don't have to have it to have a fulfilled life.
Right.
To me, that's freedom.
It's taken a while to get there, but you're there.
It's taken a long time to get there for me.
Right. And some work you didn't expect, a lot of work you didn't want, but here you are. I find it really hopeful to sit with people who have done work for decades and are still discovering and also are enjoying the fruits of all of that work, right? If I didn't know about the window of tolerance, I would be half the father that I am. I still would like to be double the father I am today, but I'd be half the dad, half the husband.
That's so
if
good.
I didn't know about this window, if I didn't know about Cartman, right? If I didn't know about reactive avoidance. I mean, every time you layer a little bit more information, then you get closer and closer to being. Some people would call it the ideal self. I think we would call it the created self.
I love that. Yeah,
it's how you were created to be.
That's
things
right.
came into your story to squeeze that window.
Yeah.
So, would you suggest that if this idea is really intriguing for the person listening, the starting place is to talk with someone who knows about it, or to maybe after this episode think about what squeezed my window? Where do we begin?
Well, both. I like both of those. Is really great. There is a new book out, and maybe we can have her on the podcast sometime.
That'd be awesome.
I know. The book is titled "Try Softer" by Undie Kolber.
Okay.
I hope I'm saying her name correctly. I think it's just a really great book. It's not about betrayal trauma. It's just about being a healthy person.
Okay.
Right. And she goes into your window of tolerance as well. Right. And some other things, some attachment issues. It's a good book.
Yeah. Trying Softer, I will admit the title feels a little odd. I'm like, because I've been hearing my whole life, try harder, right? So I'm sure that's the play on words there. So I'm guessing that she means, work smarter with this.
Yes.
Don't have such an action bias, that sort of thing.
I kind of take it that she's meaning just live in a place where there's not a lot of intensity. It's just kind of soft and calm and connecting and content.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe.
It feels like maybe I could try that, but I'm most comfortable with intensity because I'm counterphobic and it makes me feel better.
Yeah.
It's the illusion of control, which what I'm actually trying to say with a lot of words is I don't know that I have what it takes to read that book.
Okay. Well,
the title's taking me out of my window.
Yes. We're actually using her book in a betrayal partners group that I do on Monday nights. And the women have gained a lot from the book too.
Yeah, talk a little more about that. That part of your work really intrigues me, in that it is betrayal trauma that's brought the women into the room.
That's right.
And there's a specific kind of way that you guys operate.
Yeah.
I think it would be really helpful for our listeners to hear something about that, because my instinct is many who are listening and have been betrayed are listening to a podcast on a treadmill, alone.
Right.
That's a tough way to navigate betrayal. So
yes.
You guys approach it differently.
We do. The group that I do on Monday nights, and I've done it, I've been in recovery for 32 years, and I've always been a part of a group since my life fell apart. And actually, it really wasn't that much together before betrayal, but it certainly is where I've grown the most too. In doing my own work with a therapist, but also being a part of a community of women who've been through betrayal as well. So now it's just a way that I give back. I do it on Monday nights. We're officially a Sarah Society group, an in-person Sarah Society group.
Okay.
And we're structured in that we have guidelines that we read every Monday night. There's no crosstalk. We really and truly get to practice intimacy. What does it look like? Right? Because most of us came from places that we didn't really know what it meant to be fully known and to really share what's really going on.
Right.
And it is really, to me, what church should look like.
Good call.
And I love it. I love it so much. It is so life-giving. Many Monday nights, I'm like, I'm so tired. I don't know that I can do this. But I go, after a full day of work, I go, and it absolutely gives me life.
Yeah, that's the exact phrase I was thinking. It is life-giving.
It is so life-giving. And so much where we gain wisdom from other people. Yeah.
How other people see me is rarely how I see me.
Amen.
So
same.
Yeah, being in that community is very helpful. So we just, as we're wrapping this episode, I think would want to take an opportunity to say, find a group of safe people.
Absolutely.
To experience this with.
Yes, and if you don't have one in your area, Sarah Society does have Zoom meetings. They're free meetings online. All you have to do is Google Sarah Society, and you'll need to do a newcomers group, which I love the newcomers group. It's awesome. But I would encourage you. It's where you'll definitely gain wisdom.
Amazing. All right, we're going to pause the conversation there, get back together and talk about some things in a future episode. But thanks so much for making the time to talk through this really pivotal idea.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it very much.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.